A lot has changed in the 11 years since 9/11, including our national defense. We've started two wars, both in the name of 9/11, two very costly wars, a fact that is helping to shape the presidential campaign. Pentagon budget is 55% higher than it was 10 years ago. And right now there are two sets of defense cuts on the table. The first is $487 billion in cuts over the next decade. Congress agreed on it more than a year ago, and President Obama signed it as part of the Budget Control Act last summer. Military says with smart changes, it could still operate under these cuts without jeopardizing preparedness. But the second set of defense cuts is for another $500 billion. They would automatically trigger into effect in January if Congress and the White House can't cut a deal to slash the deficit by another $1 trillion. No one wants this second round of cuts, not the president, not Mitt Romney, not Congress. It's a mechanism Congress put in place to hold their own feet to the fire, a penalty for not reaching a larger debt deal. But the odds of this Congress agreeing on anything seems unlikely. Republicans are blaming the president for not leading Washington to a compromise, and the Romney camp is using the cuts in campaign ads, telling swing state voters they could lose their jobs because of it. Former Congressman Joe Sestak has been on both sides of the debate, serving his country in both the House and the military as a three-star admiral. Welcome.
It's great to be with you. And first, thank you for leading off this segment with the 9/11 victims and the surviving families. I had walked out of the Pentagon. About 30 minutes later, the plane went into that building, and people I knew and had served with didn't come out. So thank you for that.
Well, thanks for joining us. I want to bring your attention as we sort of set the scene for this defense cut debate. I want to bring your attention to a quote from a speech Obama gave, I think, last July at the Vets of Foreign Wars 113th Annual National Convention in Reno, Nevada.
Instead of making tough choices to reduce the deficit, they'd rather protect tax cuts for some of the wealthiest Americans, even if it risks big cuts in our military. And I've got to tell you, VFW, I disagree.
So on the one hand, you have the president saying that Republicans are going to protect their tax cuts and put the military on the line. Then, of course, you have Democrats blaming Republicans for making defense cuts a sacred cow, even though you have folks like Tom Coburn and Rand Paul who have called for defense cuts. You have Mitt Romney attacking the defense cuts that his running Paul Ryan voted for. It seems as though everyone is willing to make defense spending a political football, and I can't think of a sadder commentary on the state of Washington politics than on this day to be having that conversation.
You're spot on. Look, we can do much better at having a 21st century military instead of holding on to too much of a Cold War military, one that's more effective but also more cost efficient. Take the example of an aircraft carrier today that within 24 hours can strike 8 times the targets that it could do just over 15 years ago. So instead of procuring another aircraft carrier, another hull for $11 billion, how about if we take half of that money and help put it into the South China Sea and then sonify that entire sea with a netted sensor system that can give us the real-time information where every submarine of China lurks, so that we are able to target it in real time. And that's what our aircraft can do on an aircraft carrier today, because they're netted to the drones and the satellites around the world. So we are using the wrong force sizing metric from the Cold War today. It's about capability, about knowledge, like when we got bin Laden, so that you can have a more agile and smarter force that you alluded to earlier in order to go get the adversary. That's the change that continues to need brought about, instead of using the military as a football. What's the strategy? What are the threats that it goes after, and what kind of capability, not size, do you need in order to accomplish your mission?
So what about these cuts we're talking about that are set for this coming January? Specifically, you had the trigger that was pulled by the failure of the deficit super committee last year to reach a deal that basically says that unless Congress acts otherwise between now and January, there will be $600 billion of cuts phased in beginning this January for the Pentagon. Is that something that the Defense Department, in your view, can afford? They're saying right now they have no plans right now. They're sending out these alarm bells. Do you buy that? Would this be a devastating cut in your view?
That amount of money over 10 years is not a devastating cut if you change a strategy and the type of force metrics that you use to procure it. For example, the force sizing metric that is still in the new strategy that was announced this past January by the Defense Department, Secretary Panetta, is still based on the whole on the same force sizing metric that General Powell announced in 1990, which is we have to be able to fight 2 land wars, 2 stressing scenarios in Iraq and South Korea simultaneously. That type of force sizing capability metric is still there in today's new defense strategy. So if you say you still need the same logistical force, the same command and control for 2 land wars, that now one has ended, Iraq and South Korea, is no longer needed a land force from us to protect it according to the military. We can do it with our air power. What's the new strategy and the new capability you need to accomplish our mission? That's what's missing in this debate, a strategy and a force capability metric, not one that's just based on how many ships, how many aircraft, when each of them can do so much more than they did before.
Yeah, Congressman, let's go into the military aspect of it a little bit more. You talk about the difference between a Cold War military and a 21st century military. We know now the sort of tactics you need to have are different. The nature of victory is different. Are we prepared as a military? Are we adjusted to the modern way of fighting? Or are we not there yet?
No, we're not there yet. So, for example, China, to where the president has rightly shifted our focus to the Western Pacific, which is the center of gravity for the 21st century for America, not just in terms of security, but our financial, our diplomatic, our economic interests. It has 80 submarines today. We have 50. Do we want to procure another 30 at $2 billion a pop and try to have each submarine find each other needles in a haystack? Or do we procure a netted sensor system that insonifies, as I mentioned, the South and the East China Sea, to we're able then to use the knowledge as it links it up to a satellite for an aircraft to go over and drop a torpedo? That type of knowledge-based capability is what future warriors need in their hands, not just another aircraft carrier. If one aircraft carrier today, for example, can strike 8 times the targets it used to be able to. That's the change that hasn't occurred in the mindset, not only of the Defense Department, but Congress members who protect the depot and the shipbuilding industry in their districts.
Well, speaking of that, if I could ask you to put your political hat on for a minute, it seems to me like a lot of the debate over defense spending isn't driven by what our security interests are. It's driven by the politics, both members of Congress who see this as a jobs program and by the massive amounts of money that are spent by defense contractors. In 2011 alone, you had over $33 million spent by defense contractors to essentially protect their business. You know, how do you fight against that landscape?
What a great question. First off, our military budget should keep in mind as we put it together what you started this segment about, 9/11, when we got struck. Are we procuring the right weapon systems so in the future our men and women can not only go out and fight but come home? Second, the numbers that are being thrown about are truly deceiving. Take the aerospace industry study that just came out and said we're going to lose 1 million jobs if the sequester goes through. In the entire aerospace and defense sector, there's only 3.4 million jobs. So if you're going to have a 10% cut, are you going to lose 33% of all jobs? Second, mind you that when you do have procurement cut and research and development that most defense firms are out and about doing, you don't get all of that money in the first year. Only 20% of it is, on average, is spent the first year. The rest of it is spent over 2, 3, and 4 years. So the defense industry will have time through normal attrition, through retirement, to be cushioned a bit from this blow. But the bottom line of everything is, think about our future warriors. Can they find that submarine? Can they find the future bin Laden? Because we've given them the right instruments of war. It's not a jobs program. It's a war and defeat the enemy program.
Admiral Joe Sestak, thanks so much for joining us.
Great to be with you. Thank you all.
Coming up later,